I rise in support of this rule and in support of the underlying legislation. H.R. 7160, the Salt Marriage Penalty Elimination Act, would bring much-needed relief to hardworking Americans in high-tax states that make cost of living unbearable. This legislation is an important fix to our nation's tax code that will raise the cap for joint income filers, married couples, to $20,000. This legislation makes right a provision in our tax code that is clearly unfair and penalizes middle-class families in many states across our nation. Mr. Speaker, President Biden's reckless spending of hard-earned taxpayer dollars means that American families are already saddled with high inflation. Add to that the exorbitant taxes paid by those that live in states like I do that are run by Democrats who want to take and spend even more of their money. Many of my colleagues have argued that raising the cap for the state and local tax deductions is just bailing out blue states for their reckless spending and failed policies. However, New York, as is the case with many of our higher tax states, pays far more into the federal government than it receives in return. And that money that New York State pays into the federal government is invested in states across this great nation for things like infrastructure, law enforcement, and other essential services. I can assure my colleagues here today that millions of New Yorkers, including those living in my own district, are painfully aware and routinely against the fiscal insanity perpetuated by Governor Kathy Hochul of New York, just as millions of Californians are deeply opposed to the reckless tax and spend policies of Governor Gavin Newsom and Democrats in Sacramento. And that's why this legislation before us today is not a bailout for harmful state policies. It's a lifeline to Americans who are feeling the pain of this out-of-control taxation firsthand. Mr. Speaker, it's common to hear from those opposed to the SALT deduction that this deduction only benefits the very rich. I encourage them to talk to police officers and firefighters living on Long Island and Nassau or Suffolk County, or middle-class families living in Southern California, trying to pay their bills, put food on the table, and ensure their children have a good life. I think you'll find that these are the Americans who are in most need of and will benefit the most from this urgent and necessary relief. Additionally, the rule before us provides for consideration of H.Res. 987, a resolution denouncing the harmful anti-American energy policies of the Biden administration. On January 6, 2024, President Joe Biden chose to serve his political interests in the interest of the radical environmentalists over the interest in the needs of the American people. His decision to halt the export of American liquefied natural gas only further undermines our economy and further jeopardizes the security of our great nation. Liquefied natural gas, or LNG, has played a crucial role in fostering our nation's economic growth and energy independence. By putting a sudden stop to its exports, President Biden is jeopardizing the livelihoods of countless Americans who depend on the energy sector for their jobs. Now, let me be clear. This move by President Biden is nothing more than a stab in the back to the very people who fuel our nation and who have been world leaders in energy technology innovation and that make our country great. President Biden's action also emboldens our adversaries like Russia and leaves our allies in Europe, who import 68% of U.S. LNG exports, they leave them to hang out to dry. The bottom line is this: if we are to ensure our secure future of affordable and reliable energy, where the United States and our allies are not dependent on foreign adversaries for our energy needs, then we need to ensure that this nation remains a lead exporter of LNG. The president's asinine choice to prioritize the short-sighted goals of radical environmentalists and score political points from the woke mob is being made at the expense of long-term stability and compromising our nation's economic strength. It is our responsibility here as members of Congress in this House of Representatives to condemn this profoundly un-American action that is in clear contravention of American interests. I therefore strongly urge my colleagues to support this rule, and I reserve the balance of my time.